Did you happen to get that picture that I sent? All right. I was out at my mom's in Idaho a while back, and my mom was saying, you know what, we have some rats out in the garden, and we need to catch those rats. And so I caught a rat at my mom's house, and I just took a picture of it. That's my foot. That's a 9.5 rat, size 9.5. That thing is monstrous, isn't it? And this is a wood rat in the woods in Idaho, scurrying around. I don't know if the rats get that big here, but that is a monstrous rat. Have you seen a rat that big around here? You have? Okay, there you go. It is Rat City for a reason. And so we trapped some rats. As I left and Christine stayed for another week, I turned over the rat catching to my wife, and she was like, no way. But I think you caught one too, right? You caught 2 of them. So there's 4 less rats. We did end up euthanizing them fairly humanely. That was caught in the live trap, and then he saw his doom later on. So anyway, that is a gigantic rat. And around my house, how many of you have rats around your house? It's okay to admit that. I have rats around my house. This is Seattle. And we use this thing to catch rats, right? Rats. And this thing eliminates them immediately. So it's not a live trap. They're always kind of hard to set, aren't they? Because if you set it like this with your thumb here, like that, that's not good. You got to set it. You got this little trigger there, a little tiny thing. Then you set it really gently someplace. Always touch on the right end. So rat traps are really important because they kill the rat, right? And so last year, not this year, last year, my neighbor Kathy and us across the street, we were having some rat problems. I think we caught 12 of them in all outside, not inside, but if they were inside, they weren't when we caught them. And so we basically, I don't know about you, but we basically feed our rats. We have what's called, some people call it compost, we call it rat food. And so we compost out there, and it's just basically feeding the rats, and we have this whole community of rats out there. I bring this up for a reason, all right? I really do. This is important. The book of James, what we're reading this morning is about catching rats. Well, kind of. It's about something else. It's about what you put on the rat trap. I don't know about you, but our rat and our little dog loves cheese. And so if I put cheese on a rat trap, we have to be very careful because Cleo will come back and with his nose pinched. Now, when you put cheese on a rat trap, you can't just lay it on there because they'll come by and go, shoop, gone, rat trap still set. You have to set it in there like this. Like you got to get it in there so it's nice and tight, because then when it goes, it'll snap. Ooh. Okay, just a second. I'll get this. So you got to really set it in there so when they grab it, they got to play with it a little bit and chew on it and get it out. The best thing to do is not put bait on the rat trap when it's set. Because I've never pinched my fingers doing this. Maybe once. What I always notice is that the more bait you have, the more it hides that it's a trap and that it's going to kill. I mean, not kill, euthanize. Okay. All right. Perfect. The book of James is talking about bait. Life is full of trials and temptations. James has already spoken about these trials that kind of test our faith. That testing, when endured, leads to growth and completeness, a grounding and a wholeness that points us towards righteousness. So that's what we learned back here in verse 2 through 4 when James says, troubles of many kind come your way, so consider it an opportunity for great joy. So that passage is talking about trials will come your way, so you can consider trials an opportunity for great joy, right? An opportunity to grow. that your faith can be tested. Your endurance has a chance to grow. Let it grow so that your endurance, when it's full and it's fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing. And so there's a progression into growth and righteousness, a progression of faith, of strengthening your faith. And just as there's a progression of strengthening your faith through trials and a testing of our trials, there's a growth and a strengthening of our rebellion and death when it comes to temptation. There's a difference, right? The enemy comes and he shifts temptations that seek to destroy our faith. The difference is important. God tests us to grow us. Satan tempts us to ruin us. Both are part of the Christian life, though. James gives us two pictures in this passage. So listen to this. James chapter 1, verse 12. God blesses those who patiently endure testing and temptation. Afterwards, they'll receive a crown of life that God has promised to those who love him. And remember, when you're being tempted, do not say, God is tempting me. God is never tempted to do wrong, and he never tempts anyone else. Temptation comes from our own desires, which entice us and drag us away. These desires give birth to a sinful action. And when sin is allowed to grow, it gives birth to death. The blessed man is the one who endures trials and testing and receives a crown. The tempted man is the one who is lured by desire, dragged into sin, and when sin matures, it gives birth to death. Trials are invitations to choose joy, to grow in righteousness and wisdom and experience life. Temptations are invitations to rebel against God's righteousness and abandon God's goodwill and experience death. I'll just say that again for us, okay? Trials are invitations to choose joy, to grow in righteousness and wisdom, right? Invitation to grow and experience life. Temptations are something different. They are invitations to rebel against God's righteousness and abandon God's goodwill for us. They're an invitation for us to see and experience death. So there's a blessing of endurance. And this, in verse 12, it says, God blesses those who patiently endure testing and temptation. Testing, it kind of exposes us, right? It exposes whether our faith is genuine. Temptation reveals the focus of our worship. So there's two things I want us to understand what James is saying. There's testing and there's temptation. Temptation comes from the enemy, and it kind of comes through our own desires. Testing can come from the Lord as he's giving us tests and encouraging us to grow. Testing exposes whether our faith is genuine. Temptation reveals our focus, where our focus of worship is. The blessed man is not the one who avoids hardship, but the one who clings to Christ in the middle of hardship, in the middle of trials and tribulations. Trials stretch us, they pull us, they show us that what we're made of as we trod through the valley of the shadow of death, right? Those kind of trials are important. There is a reward when we go through trials and temptations and we make it out of them without stumbling. There's a reward, and that reward, James is saying, is a crown of life. What is this crown of life? Not a literal crown of gold, but it's an eternal crown. There's more to it than just something physical we get. It's a promise to those who love him, something more. Our endurance is a testimony to that love that we have. So it's a promise, usually an eternal promise, but also a here promise in the midst of our life right now. This crown of gold, a crown of life, if you will. It's not a statement about how we receive salvation. We shouldn't look at anything that James says about trials and temptations and how we act out our faith as ways to receive salvation. That's not what it's about. We know that to receive salvation is through faith alone in Jesus and God's generous grace given to us. James is talking about something different. After we receive salvation, we have trials and testing in our lives. And so we think of Olympic runners, especially in Paul's day. They trained, they denied themselves, they ran for a wreath. That was well, you could throw away and it would just decompose. It was made out of leaves and would wither away. But James says God's children run for a crown that never fades away. They do it to win a prize that will fade away, but we do it to win an eternal prize. There's so much more to a race of life than mere gold and jewels, right? There's so much life. And when we've experienced some kind of death in our lives, we understand that when we have life, it's like this jewel that we hold on to. It's like something we experience and look for. And when we discover it, we'll sell everything we have and go buy a field that has that life in it and go dig it up, and it will be precious to us. That's the kind of life that James is talking about. So don't measure blessing by your comfort. Measure it by your faithfulness. Blessing is not a bigger paycheck, not bigger jewels, not a bigger crown that we can hold and touch and smell. But it's a deeper perseverance that proves and kind of proofs our belonging to Christ, proofs our faith. So a question that I would come up with here often is, what happens when you're squeezed? Gotti and I have talked often about when we're squeezed. If you squeeze a lemon, you would expect lemonade to come out. If you squeeze an orange, you would expect an orange juice to come out. But if you squeeze you, what do you expect to come out? A man of God, a woman of God who squeezes out this perfume or tastiness that points people back to God. What happens when you get squeezed out? And when James is talking about faith, he's kind of showing that in our lives, is that when we're demonstrating faith, or when we have a time for trial to come up, when we're squeezed, what comes out of us? The Dr. Jekyll or the Mr. Hyde? When things don't go the way that we hope, do we turn into a ravaging wolf and start biting at people? Or do we leave church and worship God only to drive down the street and curse somebody out because they cut you off? Do you get bogged down when the going gets tough, when trials happen? Do you blame God and curse him? Do you hide from people of God when things get tough, which is usually what we do as Christians? Things are tough. We have misunderstanding. We start blaming other people. Trials and temptation happen in our life, and we run away from God's people altogether. We stop attending church. We stop getting together with our small groups. Stop going out with brothers and sisters who can lift us up and encourage us. We often blame God and curse him. Are you known for patiently enduring? Patience is a word soaked with time. God blesses those who patiently endure testing and temptation. Patience is soaked in time. It's something that takes time. Often we say, I've been very, very patient for the last 2.5 minutes, right? And I've heard many, we know that, right? I've heard many people say, I've been so patient. Why isn't God blessing me? I've walked away from my 30 years of addiction and a criminal activity. Why isn't God blessing me? And I'm like, how long have you been patient? For 2.5 days, right? It's like, yes, you spent 30 days running away from God, 30 years running away from God, and now we expect everything to turn. And of course, God transforms us, but patience is something that's soaked in time. James, he later will say in chapter 5, verse 11, we give great honor to those who endure suffering. So you all know those people who have endured suffering, and we give great honor to those people. But it took a lot of time to get there, right? Read books of history and things and the things that great people have done. We only call them great people because for a long time they endured incredible suffering and they came out on the other end. We give great honor to those who endure suffering. For instance, you know about Job, a man of great endurance, You can see how the Lord was kind to him at the end, for the Lord is full of tenderness and mercy. Patience is about time. And so James is pointing us here. He's pointing us to patience in testing and temptation. How hard is that for you? Difficult? Well, James knows it's difficult, and so he pushes the envelope just a little bit forward. So trials, we know those are allowed by God and often come by God. If I had us raise our hand, a lot of us would say, I'm in the deep trials right now. And I don't know where God is. I don't know how to answer God. I don't know. It's stacking on top of the next thing and the last thing, and the trials get worse and worse, and it's just very, very hard to figure out. Patiently enduring trials. But it also says patiently enduring temptation. There's a source of temptation. So in verse 13, remember, when you're being tempted, do not say, God is tempting me. God is never tempted to do wrong, and he never tempts anyone else. Temptation comes from our own desires, which entice us and drag us away. Temptation comes from the enemy. It doesn't come from God. And we should never say that God is the one tempting us, because he is not tempted himself. God cannot be tempted. And so what happens in Matthew? Remember Matthew? Sermon on the Mount? Just before that, Jesus would get baptized, and then he'd go out into the wilderness, and he would be tempted. So something was happening with Jesus. This says God cannot be tempted. Jesus was fully man and fully God at the same time. And so the temptation in the wilderness was the enemy coming to tempt the fully man side of Jesus, but he could not tempt the fully God side of Jesus. God cannot be tempted because he doesn't have any earthly desires or man desires that we have. He's fully God. He can't be tempted. He has no evil desires that well within him. He doesn't have the flesh, the sinful nature. His desires are pure and righteous and holy. And what we're seeing here is that the enemy tempts us because of our human desires. And since God doesn't have those, he can't be tempted. And so Jesus was tempted in the wilderness from his fully man side, not from his fully God side. So God tests, but he never tempts. Trials are from God to refine us. Temptations are from us or from within us, stirred up by the enemy to destroy us. We know, 2 Corinthians 2:11 says, we know that he's trying to outsmart us. The enemy is trying to outsmart you constantly. We're familiar, 2 Corinthians 2:11 says that we're familiar with his evil schemes. Are you familiar with the evil schemes of the enemy in your life? Are you familiar with what he does in your life? How he tempts you, how he brings up things in your life, gets you to get to a place of sin, to take the bait? Well, he knows. So temptation lures us away from God's love and the love of the Father. Testing encourages us to draw closer to the Father's love. Temptation lures us away from God's love. The true source of this temptation, as it says here, is us. The true source is our own problems, our own desires. The true source woos us away. I was trying to find it. For some reason, I can't. It's in verse 13. And remember, when you're being tempted, do not say, God is tempting me. God is never tempted to do wrong. He never tempts anyone else. Temptation comes from our own desires, which entice us and drag us away. Lured and enticed by our own desires. The imagery is of bait on a trap. Lured and enticed to that, right? Temptation often looks attractive, but the hook or the trap is deadly. Come to find out, the bait hides the hook. The bait hides the trap. And it's deadly, but we can't see it because we're so attracted to the lure, to the bait. A fisherman never shows the fish. Wow, that was jarring. A fisherman never, that was good actually, because that is exactly what happens in our life. That scared the bejeebers out of me. But isn't that the point? A fisherman never shows the fish the hook, only the worm. In the same way, Satan never shows us destruction, only short-term pleasure. We can't say the devil made me do it or God is putting this in front of me to tempt me. The hard truth is temptation gains power because of the desires in our own hearts. I don't need to spell a list of sinful things out for you or a sinful desire so you can know what the enemy uses in your life. Go read Romans 1. You already know what those desires in your personal life are. We're enticed. We're lured in. Actually, the word enticed means it means hypnotized or captivated, enticed in, drawn into a space where we stop making our own decisions. Any of you have ever been to that place? The lure is so enticing, it's like we're hypnotized from it. We don't see the spring around it. We don't see that little lever. We don't see that thing's going to come over and get us. We don't see the hook behind the bait. We're so lured and hypnotized by the bait. It's like our minds stop working. We're enticed. These words are pregnant with meaning, which we all have experienced. We have no ability to think about anything else except for the bait on that trap. And it's a pathway to sin. So there's a pathway to sin. It's a deadly progression. Desire, deception, disobedience, and death. These desires give birth to sinful actions. And when sin is allowed to grow, it gives birth to death. Desires. Desires, sometimes I go to God and I'm like, God, would you just take the desire away? Anybody else? Like, just take the desire away. Then I wouldn't have a problem anymore. There'd be no temptation. I wouldn't have the temptation if the desire wasn't there. If I didn't like cheese, I wouldn't even go for the trap. But desires are good. God created you with desires. And so there's the enemy uses desires and God uses desires. God created you with desires, and these desires grew with how we were raised by our parents and kind of shaped and situated and molded into the men and women that we are. He created every fiber of your being. He knit you together when you were in your mother's womb. He knew you before you were conceived. He gave you a personality, and he gave you hopes and dreams, and you are unique. Each and every one of you, a unique human being before God who has desires that he's given to you. You have desires for love and joy and peace. You desire to be wanted, right? To be accepted and appreciated. You have a desire to be significant, to be valued. These are good things that come from God. They're good things, and they are beautiful things. And if God would take those desires away, we would be less beautiful. It'd be like taking the color out of an amazing painting, amazing masterpiece, and just wiping the color off and taking the texture of a painting out of the painting and just making it flat and dull. If we had no desires, we'd be flat, dull humans. And so God has given us these desires, and these desires are twisted by the enemy in the world that we live, and he takes the desires and he twists them a little bit, and he takes everything that we have, this truth and beauty that we have, and he twists it just a little bit, leaving enough truth in it so we are confused and twisting it into where the enemy uses it for death. Psalms 37:4 says, "Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you your heart's desires." Now, of course, he's not saying he'll give you the heart's desires of unrighteousness. He'll give you your heart's desires of righteousness before God. Desires are not bad or evil. They are good, but they are capable of being corrupted by the flesh. They're capable, the sinful nature with which we're born, our desires can lead to immorality or greed or jealousy or selfishness or pride, and those desires, the enemy takes those desires and twists them into self-worship. This is what happened at the very beginning. The desire that Eve looked upon the tree wasn't an evil desire. The enemy took it and twisted it. They're capable, these desires, of being corrupted by the flesh. When our God-given desires are twisted by the enemy and filtered through our sinful nature of rebellion, born from our first parents, we can seek unnatural and ungodly ways to fulfill our desires. And we zoom in on this bait, and all we can see is the bait, and the enemy twist it. The bait is good. There's nothing wrong with cheese. Unless you're lactose intolerant, then there's something wrong with cheese. But there's nothing wrong with the bait. Often, the bait, there's nothing wrong with. It's how the enemy has twisted it. He twists it so we seek unnatural and ungodly ways to be fulfilled. Temptation takes advantage of our weaknesses and our lack of discipline, attempting to fulfill our desires in rebelliousness. Temptation comes from our own desires that well within us, right? And when we're undisciplined as a man of God or a woman of God, and we wake up in the morning and we don't give our day to God, we kind of go off into our life of trajectory of the phone. The phone takes everything that we desire that's good of knowledge and wanting to see and understand and the beauty, and it twists it. And it can be used as a great tool, but it twists it away from God. Our own desires. You're tempted in ways that your friends or family might not be tempted. It's unique to you, and those ways are unique to you. And so it's hard sometimes for a brother to say, I'm tempted by the same thing. I can understand that when we often are tempted by many different things. And so the pathway to sin, a deadly progression is desire, deception, disobedience, and death. So these desires are God-given, but the enemy uses them. But there's also a deception in there. Temptation comes from your own desires, which entice us and drag us away. Entice us, lures us by bait, drags us away, snares us in a trap. You ever used a live trap? The animal has to go inside this live trap. You have to lure it into this kind of tunnel that looks safe, and there's a yummy goodie snack in there for that animal to come into that live trap that will then trap it. You have to lure it into a place. Bait is used to lure the prey away from safety so that it can be trapped and hooked in a place of non-safety. I got to believe that no animal steps into a trap on purpose, unless it's a animal who wants to give his life for the sake of, I don't know, maybe his family. Get rid of that trap. I don't know if that happens, right? Animals don't go into a trap on purpose, ever. No fish knowingly chomps down on a hook. The trap and hooks are hidden by the bait, and if it isn't hidden, the bait is desirable enough to make the trap even look more insignificant. Crazy, right? Enough bait makes the trap look insignificant. How does that work in your own life? You each know where you're trapped, right? And how the enemy takes the bait, and somehow the significance of destruction, rebellion, and death becomes less. I've seen studies that point to men having and women having adulterous affairs. And somehow the lure becomes so attractive that the total implosion and loss of everything in life becomes minimized. And they're willing to risk everything by stepping into an adulterous affair. The enemy does that. Temptation always carries with it this bait. And the bait hides the fact that partaking in that activity leads to destruction, sorrow, and punishment. The hunter and fisherman knows that what kind of bait to use for his prey, what kind of bait to put on. I'm assuming that if I put a piece of metal on there, no rat is going to get that. Cheese and peanut butter. That's going to happen, right? So a hunter and fisherman knows what kind of bait to use on his prey. Do you know what kind of bait the enemy uses on the trap? He knows your weakness, sometimes better than you do. He knows what you struggle with. He knows what pathway he needs to set you on to get you to take the bait. The enemy is a student of you, and he knows how to get humanity to chomp into that bait. He knows what bait to use. He makes sure that he approaches you when you're hungry, when you're needy, you just need. The enemy knows how to take advantage of those who are hungry. Maybe it's a physical hunger, maybe it's an emotional hunger, a spiritual hunger. He takes advantage of those emotions and those things to lure you in. Satan will try to deceive you by making sin look safe or not that bad or something you deserve. He's good at getting humanity to believe they deserve their desires and without guilty feelings. Why should I feel guilty about this? I deserve this. Guilt and shame piles in. I've often wondered why it was so important for people who say they're atheists, who don't believe in God, why it's so important for them to push against people who are making them feel shamed or guilty. If there's atheism, there can't be really a concept of shame and guilt in our world. That's a spiritual kind of being, a spiritual presence that we enter into. And so the enemy pushes against us. How dare you make me feel shame or guilt in this? We feel like we should be able to partake in our desires without shame or guilt. He'll make sin look safe. He'll make sin worth self-pursuit of pleasure, safe and rewarding, and maybe even make sin look better than doing what's right. Diminishes right, raises up the bait. Don't be misled, dear brothers and sisters, is what he says. Don't be deceived. Know the truth. Remember 1 Corinthians 10, verse 13 says that temptations in your life, I can't remember the verse. 10:13. Temptations in your life are no different from that of others. You don't have something that's unique. Everybody experiences temptation. And God is faithful. He'll not allow the temptation to be more than you can stand. Some of us think, oh yeah, try the temptation I'm involved in. It's more than I can stand. Well, the fact is, the farther we fall into temptation, the more addicted we get to those things and that bait, the harder it is to stand, for sure. But God doesn't leave us out. God is faithful even in those spaces. He will not allow temptation to be more than we can stand. And so there's disobedience in this too. These desires, swayed by enemy, gives birth to sinful actions. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it's fully grown, gives birth to death. And it's just scary, right? It should be scary to us. But the bait hides in it, makes it not scary. Why is that? When your sinful desire encounters an opportunity to be fulfilled in the wrong way, then temptation is conceived. When your sinful desires encounter an opportunity to be fulfilled in the wrong way, temptation is conceived. At that moment, if you do not find a way out, this conception of desire, opportunity will give birth to sin. Temptation isn't a sin. Many of us think, oh, I've been tempted, I've sinned already, I might as well just go all the way. Temptation isn't a sin, it's just temptation. Acting is where the sin takes place. First, the enemy captures our attention, luring us away. Then he persuades us to adopt the wrong attitude. I deserve this, it's not that bad. And finally, encourages us to take a wrong action that will hurt. When what you flirt with, you'll fall to. Don't even get near the stinking cheese. Think of King David. 2 Samuel chapter 11, King David, it says at the beginning, when the kings went off to war, David was asleep on his couch. He was flirting with danger. What he should have been doing is what kings are supposed to be doing, is actively fighting, waging war, right? Doing what he's supposed to do, work. Instead, he was lounging around, being lazy, undisciplined. And when he gets up, walks out onto his balcony, the verse 2 in chapter 11 says something like, David got up from his afternoon nap in the late afternoon, got up and looked out his balcony and saw Bathsheba. His men were out fighting and dying for the kingdom, and David was asleep on the couch and getting up in the afternoon, an afternoon nap. What a loser. But this is a man after God's own heart. yet still had temptation. David, the man after God's own heart, would find himself falling for the bait. David's sin ended in death, just so much death. His son, his friend, his honor, his future sons, so much death came out of David's sin. And that's the last part of this, is death. When sin is allowed to grow, it gives birth to death. You all know this. It's not something I got to talk you into. When sin is allowed to grow, it gives birth to death. Those two oxymoron words, right? Juxtaposition together. Birth to death. Not birth to life. If you don't take the route of escape that the Lord offers you, and he will, we could have testimony after testimony of us not taking the escape, the window of opportunity that God has given us to escape the death that's pursuing us, right? We've said no to that, and it's surprised that God's given us another escape. But when we don't take those routes, eventually you'll experience death in some way. And death is always painful. It always just hurts. It's like this physical. So I was going to do this with my hand, and I tested it several times in my garage. It just hurt all the time. I couldn't get it not to hurt, even just a little snap. So I opted for a glove. There's just a lot of pain when the trap goes off, right? And we see that pain, and we know it's going to hurt because we've been down this road before, and we know it hurts. It broke our fingers. It brought death. There's a physical death, a spiritual death, an eternal death, an emotional death, a social death. There's so much death, yet we reach for the bait anyway. It's kind of crazy. We've got a few verses, Proverbs 12, verse 28. Just a couple verses for you in this. Proverbs 12:20. The way of the godly leads to life. That path does not lead to death. The way of the godly leads to life. Proverbs 13:14. The instruction of the wise is like life-giving fountains. Those who accept it avoid the snares of death. There's a way out that God gives, and that way out is an instruction of the wise. It's like a life-giving fountain. Those who accept it avoid the snares of death. Deuteronomy 30, verse 15. Do you have that so I don't have to look it up? Oh, okay. Deuteronomy 30, verse 15. Oh, now you're... there it is. Okay. I wasn't looking it up, actually. Now listen, today I'm giving you a choice between life and death, between prosperity and disaster. Take the choice. There is a choice between life and death. Of course, Romans 6:23 says that the wages of sin is death. Sin never stays small in our life. What begins as a thought becomes a pattern, then a stronghold. James wants us out of that. He warns us about the end. It's not freedom, but it's destruction. Sin dances with our emotions and our hormones to enter into the stage of death. Augustine, before his conversion, wrote about praying as a boy. And if you know Augustine's story, his mother was praying for him. Before his conversion, he would say, "Lord, make me pure," but not yet. He later confessed that giving in to little sins only enslaved him more. Sin always takes us further than we want to go, further than we think. That can't hurt that bad. Kill sin, men and women, while it's small. Don't negotiate with it. Don't excuse it or delay it. Romans 8:13 says, if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. James is brutally honest about the dangers of sin here. It's really quite brutal. It leads to death. And there's a crown, though, for life. He leaves us with this option to choose life, and a crown of life is promised to those who love him. 1 Corinthians 10:13 assures us that no temptation will ever overtake us that isn't common to man, and which God won't provide a way of escape for us. So I want to encourage you to look for the way of escape. Look up. Fix your eyes on Jesus, who endured temptation without sin. Look up. When you're finding yourself lured in by the bait, open your Bible and read the Word. Start praying for the people that are surrounded in that space of sin. Fall on your knees. Look upward. Look inward.